This episode, usually in a Really No Really episode, one of us we hear about something, we encounter something that makes us go, huh, I wonder what that's about.
No, it makes us go,
really?
No, really.
Really.
So
but usually one of us will then do some research. Usually I'm going to give it up. You use some research. So by the time we meet the guest, you have at least a level of understanding, some knowledge of the inner workings or the complexities of the thing we're talking about, a way to start formulating questions to engage and draw out the vital information.
So in this Really No Really, the Really No Really is Jason and I realized it's the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons.
And the Really No Really is that somebody gives a shit.
We don't know shit about this. And then I start researching, and I didn't realize. I guess one of the companies that owned this previously was called the Wizards of something. And I'm going,
yeah.
But you're just reading a line because I'm trying to prep for both of us, and I'm going. So the Wizards of so-and-so released a thing, and I'm going, who are the Wizards of so-and-so? I know nothing.
I don't know who they are. I don't know what the thing is. I don't know what they released. I don't know how they found it to release it to begin with. Now, my son Gabe, actually my son Noah too, but Gabe it really plays this, and our own David Guggenheim is very into this.
The first thing I asked David Guggenheim is, how do you win? And he goes, oh, you don't win.
You just
I
don't
went,
win.
all right, I got to go.
Yeah, right.
I got to go. You don't win. You just
It's
play.
not a game in the sense of a game. It's a lifestyle choice. I don't know what this thing is.
It seems to be a game that you play for all eternity.
That's right.
And I said to David...
And since prisoners on death row play it, you literally play it till you die.
Well, and by the way, if you're in what's like a tough prison right now, Rikers, you're in Rikers.
Sure.
Rikers. Hey, did you hear John's an elf? I mean, does that get you? What does that get you? I can imagine what it gets you, but I don't want to go there. So let's say hi to our guests. Let's welcome our guests because we weren't.
Now, this
honestly,
is a fascinating guy, and I can't listen. We're making a lot of fun. This guy is the real deal,
Well,
and if there's answers to this,
we're making fun of us though, because obviously. We're 50
we
years
are in
late
the
to the
minority.
party. We're 50 years late, apparently, to the party.
Yeah.
They're celebrating 50 years, and we're going, what is it?
I'm still playing hearts and Parcheesi. I didn't know.
I still haven't broken the code on Monopoly.
Right?
So you get who you're dealing with here.
Yeah.
We're not Mensa.
We don't understand.
We're Densa, not Mensa, okay?
So we're going to meet Jon Peterson, who actually studies the history of games in general, but especially tabletop role-playing games and war games, both of which is this. His first book has just been re-released. It's called Playing at the World 2E, Volume 1, The Invention of Dungeons and Dragons. It's been called the first serious history of the development of D&D. I'm going to use the lingo now, D&D.
Where are you cool?
He co-authored the Hugo Award finalist Dungeons & Dragons Art and Arcana and the New York Times bestselling official Dungeons & Dragons cookbook, Heroes Feast.
So let's say
hello
hi, John.
to Mr. Jon Peterson.
Hello. Well, thanks for having me.
We're so delighted. Now, already I'm learning things. You ready for what my first observation?
I know
that
it's
I'm
going to
learning?
be. I know it's going to be.
If you're watching on YouTube and you can see the portal at which we're looking at John, his home is nicer than mine. So already something is not right.
Something's going on.
Something is not right. This guy is pretending he's a dwarf at the battlements. I'm trying to work for a living, and look what he's got versus what I'm here with you. What's wrong with this picture?
So let me be clear. Doing D&D history, there is no money in it. I promise.
Good choice. Congratulations. Your parents must be thrilled.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Why do you do? Okay, so again, what makes you? I saw an interview with you where you said, "Yeah, I wrote a 600-page book, but it was hard because I could have written 1,200 pages." And I go, 600 pages, and he makes no money doing this. You must love this on a level that's out of this world.
I am a bit of a fan, and I guess I'm one of those people who feels like D&D was one of the signature cultural innovations of the late 20th century, and that it has led to so much. It's been so profoundly influential. And, maybe not the level of like the internet or something, okay, but like in terms of its pervasive, just, depiction of a new form of entertainment, yes, D&D matters.
So can you talk, if you can, encapsulate for people?
Like where it came from?
People who know it are going to be bored, so I don't want to go too long, but people who don't know it, I'd love to be impressed with the starts
where it
of
came from. It must have a terrific origin story.
The origin story, the guys who started, et cetera, if you can fill us in, yeah.
I can. So back in 1974, there were two guys who were Midwesterners who were really into war games. So you got to kind of understand what war games are to get where D&D started. So war games are these conflict simulation games where usually what you're doing is you're replaying like one of the great battles of Napoleon, right? And you imagine you're the commander and you can move around little chits on a board. And could you win Waterloo in a way that Napoleon couldn't, right?
Sure.
And like, so these guys are really into games like that. And, you know, at around the same time, though, in the 1960s, Tolkien and sword and sorcery fiction in particular started to become like profoundly popular.
Right.
And there was this like chocolate and peanut butter moment where people said, okay, can we take this conflict simulation stuff, which is all based on like mathematical models and rolling dice and figuring out things like how good this kind of unit is against that kind of unit, right? And apply that to things like orcs and Balrogs and Ents and wizards and all the things that would be familiar from Tolkien.
Wow.
And so really look at it like it kind of started from that. And this began for Gary Gygax, one of the two co-creators, in 1971 with a little pamphlet he published that was called Chainmail. And this was kind of the first book you could buy that had like systems for how to be Gandalf. Like what you know, if you want to put him in a conflict simulation context, like how many hits could Gandalf take in a fight before he dies? When he casts a spell, you know, how many orcs will be slain by it? Things like that. And this then gave birth to a whole bunch of fascinating activities that started to bring things from the army level down to the individual level. Where instead of really thinking about I'm commanding an army where I'll have wizards and I'll have a bunch of, you know, soldiers with swords and axes and bows and things like that, down to, okay, each of the players is going to have an individual character. And this individual character might be a wizard and they'll have a name and they'll have a set of spells they can cast. And the individual players then take on the roles of these characters and pursue a story in which they adventure in a world. Famously, they go down into these dungeons that appear in the name of the game, where they'll fight monsters and get treasure and become more powerful as a result of it. And this was the birth of what we came to call a role-playing game. And role-playing games have become just such a big business, not just on the tabletop, but they quickly kind of jumped into computers. At the time D&D came out in 1974, computer games were pretty rudimentary, right? But like, you know, by 1975, there were already people adapting D&D for computers. And pretty much any AAA game that you look at today, and these are games that make, you know, billions of dollars, right? That has that DNA in it. All it owes back to that 1974 original set of rules in which you got to play a character, be a protagonist, adventure, get more powerful, and have an epic quest.
And when did it take off? What was the year? Did it take off like immediately, or was it a couple of years down the road? Because I heard in reading for this, it's funny because I saw one of the things that exploded it was Satanism, witchcraft,
Yeah.
you know, fighting, murder, etc. Which, by the way, you can get all of that at Grand Theft Auto if you want it. But did the controversy explode it?
Definitely it did. And I mean, the controversy kind of built gradually, but look at it like this. This was a really small insular hobby when it started. These guys at this company called Tactical Studies Rules that published D&D originally, they originally printed like 1,000 copies of this, and they weren't going to sure they were going to sell those, right? And like it built a little bit, like but by 1976, 77, it penetrated into college campuses. It was becoming kind of an underground thing. But then just one of these historical accidents happened, which is in 1979, there was a kid who was in East Lansing, Michigan. He was a university student who disappeared. His name was James Dallas Egbert III. And when he disappeared from his college campus, people developed this theory because they heard he'd been playing this bizarre game called Dungeons and Dragons, that he had come to believe the fantasy was real, that he had gone down into the steam tunnels beneath the university and was trying to like find orcs to kill or something down there, got lost, trapped, diluted, possibly died. And this led to this huge mainstream press, just sensationalist coverage that simultaneously demonized the game and made it immensely popular the way that like only a weird historical accident like that could.
So John, I just want to go back because again, please forgive me. I know so little about this. If I'm asking just banal, rudimentary questions, but it sounds like somebody came up with here's how here's rules 1 through 100 of how, if you want to play this game, that's played. But it sounds like that those rules are very much player generated in some ways as well, especially when I watch people play it. And I'll give you the goofy example, but it seems like I'm rubber, you're glue. So somebody goes, I'm rubber, you're glue. Everything you say bounces off me and sticks to you. And the guy who it sticks to goes, yeah, but I cast a spell on me so things don't stick. They actually become animated and they attack your eyes. Oh, yeah, well, my eyes are protected by a visor that I won when And you go, okay, well, this is just, I'm just trading horse pucky back and forth. I mean, is the game grown by the players who then generate variations on how to do this? And if so, how does a group of gamers or a dungeon master keep that sort of playground version of the conflict from happening?
Well, so you said the two key words there, dungeon master. So you need to think about a game of D&D like there are two classes of participants. There's a dungeon master and then there are players. And the dungeon master doesn't have like a character. The dungeon master's job is to play the world. And moreover, the dungeon master's job is to be the authority on what is true about the system and about what you can and can't do. Mm-hmm. So if a player says, I'm rubber and you're glue, the dungeon master is the one who says, well, no. This is the armor you're wearing, this is the equipment you have, and this orc stabs you and you are now dead. Right. And so you need in these games, and in the computer version, of course, the computer plays this role for you. Right. You don't really have a dungeon master. The computer does the dungeon mastering. But like the crux of the game is that the players inhabit the characters, and the characters can attempt anything. This is a really crucial thing about it. Like anything you could describe as a possible action, you can propose it as what your character does. And it's then up to the dungeon master to tell you what the result of doing that will be, whether it's what you intended, whether it's something you didn't intend. You're like, okay, I'm going to cast a grease spell. And my hope in casting this grease spell in this room is that every orc is suddenly going to be on slippery ground and they're all going to fall down. And like, this is going to work and it's going to be great. And the dungeon master says, fantastic, but you forgot that there are these fires on the side of the room. And in fact, you and the orcs and everybody you know is now in this immense conflagration, right? So somebody keeps track of the state of the world. And, the players merely have the power to state their intentions. The dungeon master has the power to say what happened. Whose
world are they looking at as a guide?
Well, so the dungeon master job is also to describe the world. Think about it this way. They're kind of sounding boards, the dungeon master and the player are. At the start of the game, the dungeon master says, this is the situation. So Jason, Peter, you've entered the tavern. And the two of you see in front of you a shadowy figure who is sitting at a table and a map is laid out before him. What do? This is the classic way that a situation might start, right? And in response to what do you do, then Jason, what do? You saw that figure. You don't need to know anything more about this game than what I've told you right now.
Right.
You guys walk into the tavern, you see that shadowy figure with the map there. He's got some gold coins on it. What do you do?
And I would say I go over and ask the stranger what he's looking at, and may I look as well.
Precisely. And we just continue from there. He tells you this is a map to a place where these mysterious coins were found. And, he then says, if you're so interested, like I personally can't go there because it's like super dangerous, but perhaps the two of you would like to adventure there, where I understand that there's a mountain of these coins available, and there may be some sort of guardian or curse or something like that, but I'm sure the two of you can work that out. Why don't you go look into it? Here's where the place is in the map. Go for it.
John, but as soon as you said that, it's fascinating, sitting there with a map and some gold coins. What's my goal? What's my motivation? When I said to David Guggenheim, we're going to bring him in a second because he does play this and he is somewhat expert at it. If I don't know what my motivation is and there's no winning and I'm just getting points, why would I engage if I don't know what direction where I want to end up? How would I know what questions to ask or where to go? I may say back, I want to watch other people interact with him first and see if he's a threat, or I don't know what I'm doing because I don't know enough about what I'm trying to accomplish.
Well, it'd be very wise for you actually to sit back and watch and figure out what's up with this guy before you go up and credulously believe his story. But you did mention, Yeah, your job in a game like this, the obvious goal is just to gain more power. The obvious goal is to gain more treasure, gain more power, advance, and the way to advance is to adventure. And through adventuring, you gain what are called experience points. And if you gain certain experience points thresholds for your character, you advance in level. And this concept, by the way, has become a kind of influential one. Like, it's hard to play a computer game that does not have some element of that in it, right? Where through the more you play, kind of the better you prove. And this, experience and power then makes you ready for, even greater adventures, to tackle even greater adversaries. So that's the ostensible goal of the game.
I'm curious too, not knowing details, but I want to bring David in a second. All of a sudden I look at cancel culture, and I look at trigger warnings and stuff. This is a game that was, if you look at the culture 50 years ago and think about what it was and how people spoke, does somebody monitoring that and adjusting this game as it goes over 50 years so it doesn't cause a huge backlash?
Can you, without, I'm being serious now because I'm trying to hone in on your question, without straying into something that might be offensive, can you give me an example?
Sexuality. I mean, 50 years ago, you could call somebody something. You could name somebody something. You could do violent stuff. There's been video game stuff where people say video games are causing all kinds of stuff. Okay. So the culture has changed so dramatically in how we look at comedians from 50 years ago. Look at the jokes.
Sure, yeah.
Take my wife, please. I mean, so this was done in that time. In that culture, our culture has moved a lot in 50 years about what you're allowed to say, sensitivity of people. Has the game dramatically changed to take that into acknowledgement?
Yes. So in those 50 years, there have been 5 major editions of the game. And in each one, you can see kind of more and more inclusivity, more and more roles for women. The original game had very little as roles for women. It assumed sword and sorcery heroes of the stamp of Conan, or the kind of, heroes you see in Tolkien, right? Where, this is very much a male-dominated, male-centric world. Like, that started to erode. But you were mentioning the satanic elements. That's another good example. Like, there was a whole backlash against the game for its supposed satanic content. And so they took out, for a time, the words demon and devil, other words that were viewed as being offensive potentially to fundamentalist Christians. Those were later restored when that particular cultural issue was no longer the most important one in people's minds. But if you look at the game today, yes, I mean, Wizards of the Coast, who is the current publisher of the game, has made the game far more inclusive in terms of what roles are available to people of different races, different ability, different gender. And, this... I think every generation has really reinvented D&D for itself, right?
So are you, John, I guess I should be asking my own child this, but my son Gabe often serves as a dungeon master. Should I therefore assume he has done a bunch of the reading and understood what the current parameters and guidelines are, or would it not be unusual for 5 people to sit down and somebody go, all right, I'll be the dungeon master, and not know what the hell he's talking about, but he's a creative guy and he goes yes to this, no to that. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, in short, probably if he is successful, that is, if people come back and play with him again, he probably has some chops. He probably has at least enough understanding of the system that people feel like they're playing the game when they're playing with them. Yeah. But it's also important to understand it is a game that takes place in a dialogue. And like I said, really what the players mostly experience is that tavern scene I was describing for you, right? The dice come out when there's some kind of conflict that, you then want to consult tables. So, well, what does it take if I want to stab that guy in the back and surprise him, that'll be a die roll, right? And then you need to go consult the right tables for that to figure out what happens. But, those are more exception cases, really, I think, than that pure conversation where the players, again, just kind of say what it is they want to try to do. And, a lot of things players suggest the system has no way to adjudicate. This has been true from the very start. And it's also true today. Playing as, being a dungeon master, you need to be able to improvise. When people propose they want to do something and the rules have no way of adjudicating it, or you don't feel like going and looking it up, you wing it. And it works. I mean, it's one of the miraculous, weird things about it. I don't know why it works. And I study this thing, right? But as long as players have that feeling that the dungeon master is making a considered decision about the world, then it works. You almost don't even know what or how that decision is made.
You know what, John? Let's welcome our favorite, everybody's favorite dungeon master, David Guggenheim, who plays this every Friday? This is where you go every Friday, right, David?
Every Friday.
For three.
And David, how long is an average game session for you guys?
I would say 3 to 4 hours.
Okay.
Are you enjoying this, David? This is your episode, my friend. You've got the guy on, the expert. Anything you want to ask him to make your game enhanced?
No, I want to be a prick instantly because in the 2024 edition of 5e, your grease is no longer flammable, man.
Yes, I hear you. Yes.
Oh my God!
This changes over and over again. Yes.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
We're just going to let the microphones run, and we'll be back next week.
The toilets are flushing differently. My God, what the hell?
That book isn't even out yet. That you have one and that you know this. It's,
Oh, boy.
Right, I know.
All right, so here's a question
I'm looking
for
at.
both
I
of
just
you.
might say I'm looking at David differently because if he knows the minutia of the minutia,
What is he not doing for us that he's spending time
hours,
doing?
yes.
So, for both of you, what do you find? What makes how do I say this? What makes somebody so attracted to this game and so good in it? Is it only really work for people who can abandon themselves to their imagination and get into this role of playing stuff? What kind of people does it appeal to, and what kind of people does it not appeal to?
David, I mean,
Well,
what's your view?
No, I actually have an answer to that, and John, correct me if you think I'm wrong. And that's, I think, links back to what you were saying, Peter. This was a game that was created in '74, and there's been a lot that changes now, and this is something that wasn't in the 2014, the current book until the new books come out very soon, a session 0, where everybody who is going to play the game gets together and they're going to talk about the things that are going to be part of the game. The dungeon master will say things, and there will be like, hey, there might be something that might be triggering or upsetting, and players would be able to say, you know what, I'd rather you not do that because that would take me to an unpleasant place. And the dungeon master would either say this is not the game for you, or the dungeon master, and I think this is probably more common, will alter the game for the people who are in the room, or find a happy middle ground to make sure that it is fun, it is inclusive, and everybody feels like they're part of something together.
Interesting.
So, up-leveling that a bit, I think what makes this game still appeal to us so much after so long has passed is that it is artisanal. And really every group that gets to sit around the table gets to make their own story, right? And it's a story only they have to like. Like, it might not appeal to anybody else in the world, but you get a group to sit around the table. Each of them kind of has their creative input into it, and they get to have this custom experience just for them. And like, this is really different from a AAA video game, right? Baldur's Gate 3, which came out recently, an amazing video game. It is the story that the people who created the video game have laid out for you, and you can find your path through it. But, if in your story you want to play anthropomorphic vegetables, right? Like, that is nobody's gonna make a AAA video game about that. Well, maybe they might, I don't know. But like, you can have that experience. You can have whatever you want the game to be. And like, that power, that creative power, is something I think people, especially in our very digital age, like, tap into. And it's part of what's made the game so vital in the last 10 years, especially.
Is part of this, and I hate to use this word, but I can't figure out a synonym for it that is as effective. Is part of that nerds really do rule the last 20 years? If you look in the entertainment business, the people who've taken over and in control of the entertainment business. Look how big Marvel is. Look how big superhero movies are. Look how big comic book movies are. Daredevil. I mean, every other blockbuster is from there. And then in the tech world, the nerds have kind of taken over. And again, I apologize for using that if you find it derogatory. But you know what I'm saying? It's those guys. It's, as my mother would say, from the readers. The people who studied and know stuff are like kind of running the entertainment business and running the tech business. So this kind of makes sense that they would navigate this kind of thing because they want to be challenged.
They would, and the fact that now with the internet you can watch people play this game. You can watch these tentpole shows like Critical Role, where, very competent, funny, attractive people sit around and play the game. This is something that has certainly inspired so many kids. And the demographics of this is not old fogies who are the super fans of this at this point. This is a very young audience that has become attached to D&D. And a big part of that, they grew up with Game of Thrones. They grew up with the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings adaptations. Fantasy is familiar to them in a way that it has not been for previous generations, right? But you combine that with the fact that you can now sit down, and it's not an easy game to learn from the page. This is something, and you just pick up, especially the older rule books, and try to understand what the hell you're supposed to do playing this, and you will have no idea. You really had to find an experienced group and play with them in order to get what it is, what to do when you play the game. But now you just go to YouTube, you just go to Twitch, and there are countless shows, they call them actual play shows, where you can watch competent and entertaining players do it and say, oh my God, I could do that. I could sit around the table with my friends and have as much fun as those people are having.
And John, is it, based on what you're saying, I would imagine, like, unlike Clue, where somebody goes, play Clay, come sit down, you're Professor Plum. I can't, like, if I'm visiting a friend in Ohio, I can't just sit in on their D&D session and job in like it's like I'm a part of the. It sounds like the groups become sort of singular, and it would be tricky to integrate a new player or a temporary player.
Not really. I mean, it happens quite a bit. I've jumped into countless ongoing campaigns, as they call them, right? Where, they'll just to sit in for a session or two with them. And, it requires maybe a little sleight of hand on the part of the dungeon master to explain who this new person is and why you suddenly trust them. And, there's a few tropes, I think, that people commonly deploy to explain things like that. Maybe in the dungeon, you happen to stumble across a cell. And inside the cell, there's a prisoner that has been there for how long, and you release them, and suddenly they're eager to join you and work with you. There are a whole bunch of kind of premises you can use to get someone involved. But it's definitely true that the best and the most emotionally satisfying games are ones where you do have, a tight group that kind of takes it from beginning to end. And those emotional journeys you experience playing a game like this, they stay with you. And they're...
So is that... to the extent that you are familiar with it and can speak to it, one of the things that intrigued me about this when we were thinking about doing an episode was I had read that there were prisoners not only on death row, but prisoners that have been in solitary for extended periods of time. And part of their sanity is they find ways to play the game through messages that are passed back and forth, and I was reading this in the Sunday New York Times Magazine about a year ago. These very intricate games, and you're talking about communities of these games. I would imagine that is incredibly therapeutic, and boy, I mean, in some ways, I'm wondering if playing a game like this in that kind of environment can actually evoke a change in the people that play it for some sort of societal good or their own personal growth.
No, I mean, I think I remember the same article, and I'm familiar with a few other similar cases of people who really feel like D&D is what gave them a connection to a community when they were incarcerated, that they found their people and found some stability and a world that made sense to them in this horrible environment, right? So, and there's academic research as well about this that we don't need to get into here, but whatever it is about the game, I'll say this, a lot of people charge it with being escapist, that you play this so you can kind of play a superhero, right? I may not be very successful in real life, but I'm going to go on and be this, mighty Garthak the Invincible. I guess my perspective on that is that there's no escape. Like we're all real, and our experiences are inescapably real. And the experience of playing Garthak the Invincible is not the same experience as being Garthak the Invincible, right? Which honestly, playing a lot of these wizards and these fantasy stories, it seems like a real hassle. I wouldn't want to do that, right? Like their lives have all kinds of perils and inconveniences I wouldn't want to live with. But it just creates this alternate form of experience you could have that wasn't accessible before. I mean, maybe the closest thing to it before D&D came out would be writing. right? Would be
Yeah.
doing or maybe acting in a fantasy play or something like that. But even that like doesn't have that interpersonal feeling to it. That notion again, because when you have the players and the dungeon master, you are all pulling in your own directions, and it leads to a story that feels real to you in a way that I think writing really never could. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's a transformational experience. I mean, there was an early reviewer in around 1979, one of the first mainstream reviewers who looked at D&D, who remarked that, it may turn out to be one of the most exciting discoveries of your life when you start playing it.
Wow.
So I have just two things I want to ask you before we go, and Peter, you might have something as well. Peter was beginning to share with me something about not the playing of the game, but the ownership of the game, the rights to the game. There seems to be some sort of controversy or ongoing debate about that. Can you share anything about that that would make sense to us?
Well, I mean, so the game has passed through a lot of hands over the years. The original founders of Tactical Studies Rules, those people that made the first 1,000 little boxes they tried to sell, they managed to run the game for about a decade before they kind of ran it into the ground. They overextended when it started to get popular. This was when Gary Gygax went out to Hollywood and was determined to start making movies. He made a little Saturday morning cartoon show, the D&D animated series that you may, I don't know if you are of an age to remember that when that was on, but but really things kind of crashed then, and he was ousted in favor of the first takeover. That the woman who then ran it, Lorraine Williams, she ran it again for about another decade before the game again cratered, this time largely because it was losing relevance to computer games, and another company, Wizards of the Coast, then bought it. And Wizards of the Coast has now run it through 3 major versions since then. And yeah, I mean, so there are people who feel like the original version is kind of the purest and the best. And, there's certainly people on the right who are very concerned with the inclusivity that has been introduced to the game by Wizards of the Coast progressively as in the 25 years they've been at Shepherd. And, there are people on the left who are very upset about some of the things that Gary Gygax had to say about like women playing in this game initially. He wasn't a big fan of the idea quite explicitly. And so that there's no shortage of kind of controversy and push and pull around the various editions and stewards of the game.
How do you prevent bullying? Because in real life, there's bullying. In a D&D game, can there be a lot of bullying where somebody takes over and really becomes the dominant? Like in a focus group, there's always one guy who's dominant. In a D&D game, when you have 5 friends playing, every rock group I know has a fight at some point. How do they keep these rooms copacetic for years so they can grow?
Well, I mean, David, I think, mentioned earlier things like Session Zero, where you kind of set out what everybody wants to get out of the game. And these kinds of devices are very useful. If you're a dungeon master, you want to check in with your players periodically. Are you getting what you want to get out of this game? And are directions that you're exploring that you're not comfortable with, or that you would really love us to be getting into that we're not getting into? So, it isn't just entirely played like, a strict exercise where, there's no out of character like management. Everybody has to stay in character all the time. You sit down, you eat pizza in the middle of this, you order drinks, I mean, generally my sessions start off until we start eating and drinking, and then we drink too much, and then it kind of peters out, shortly thereafter, right? So, I mean, it can be casual, it can be intense, but in the case of a bully, it's the dungeon master's job to enforce.
Just want to say Peter's out. It's triggering for me. David, do you have any questions before we let our expert go?
Well, yes, I do have a question because, and I think I've read this, John, and I wanted to see your take on it. The aspect of role playing, right, which is become very big, right? I mean, you see all of these Comic-Cons and people, dressing up, cosplaying, they want to become these characters. And then unlike books, unlike movies, this game gives you the ability to role play, as this individual, whatever you want it to be. But that element really didn't really exist in the Gary Gygax version, right? Like it was more the mechanics of the game and not so much I'm becoming a character.
Yeah, well, like I said, it started from these conflict simulation games, right? So think about it like it really was, I mean, a lot of people even joked years into D&D being popular, it really wasn't much more than a war game, with a little bit of text saying you could be a character attached to it. And I mean, the earliest rules did have this example of play. It was pretty much the only thing that gave you any sense of what you're supposed to do when you play the game, that had that dialogue between the dungeon master and the player, in which they kind of told you, this is what I want to try to do. And the DM says, great, this is what happened as a result. But Gygax himself was not a fan of the more theatrical dimension of it that you would see in the actual play games today, where you have professional voice actors who can do all these funny voices for all the different characters and things like that. And it's very entertaining. Most of us at home are not competent enough to pull that off ourselves, right? But he did frown upon that dimension of it. And he viewed it much more as a battle of wits, I think, between the dungeon master. The dungeon master set the challenges, set the dungeon, the traps, the encounters. And, it was really, can the players solve my puzzle? Much more than it was, can the player, emotionally speak to what it means to them that goblin, it turned out he wasn't evil after all. He saved me from those ogres, and now he's dead. What am I going to, that was not the kind of game that he seemed to have been interested in.
That's very good, by the way, John. Is there a best player? I know you're not trying to win, you're getting points, but I got to know, is there best players in the world? Are there rankings where you go, oh, this is the guy, we're going to watch him? And also, is there revenue to be made by playing on any level?
Well, certainly there's revenue to be made from actual play. And if you look at something like Critical Role, I mean, they landed a deal with Amazon for an animated series that was based on it. They had a Kickstarter for it that I think was one of the most profitable Kickstarters of all time. So, I mean, for as a player, sure, you can make money if you want to do this in social media. I don't think really you rank in terms of best. There used to be tournaments, especially early on in the game, and they would have these kind of invitational and masters tournaments, both for players and DMs, by the way, where you try to rank who is best at being a player and who is best at being a DM, and they would be scored in various ways. And, that's really fallen out of favor. That isn't really much done since the 80s. And, the point of this is not to be the best. The point of this is to have these experiences that you would never have in real life, and to be able to explore parts of yourself and parts of reality that you wouldn't otherwise be able to experience.
So, John, two things. If someone wanted to either get a better understanding of the game or try to find a way to jump into the experience of doing it, and you can tout your own book if you like, what's a good place to sort of get a better understanding of it and or begin an involvement? And the second part of that question is, since it's the 50th anniversary, if you could snap your fingers and imagine 50 years from now, how would you love to see the game evolve?
So the second one's a tougher one. I'll go to the first one first. Yeah. So in many towns, they have what we call friendly local gaming stores, which are places you can find actual human beings that you can play with in person. A lot of them are looking for additional players for their campaigns. We'd be more than happy to accommodate you and whatever your bizarre interests are that you want to add to their ongoing efforts. Online as well. I mean, if you just want to get started, of course, going and buying some books about this, the core source books would be a good idea. As David mentioned, there's a major revision of them underway, like right now. And so there's going to be new editions of this coming out between now and I think March of next year. That they'd be a good place to start. But also just going to YouTube, like I said, or going to Twitch and finding an interesting group of people who are playing the game, telling stories, watching it. Watch a campaign, or at least a few episodes of it, get a sense of what it is. And I think you'll figure out pretty quick whether it's for you or not.
Yeah, cool. And
for the second part...
Yeah, any fantasies about what this could become or what you would enjoy seeing another evolution go?
I mean, I think it's inevitable at this point that AI is going to play a huge part in how this game is going to evolve for the next decade, right? And, I think there are a lot of ways that AI could help make the traditional experience a richer one. Just doing the math for you and keeping track of how many goblins you killed, things like that. These are kinds of things that AI can do without taking over the game for you. Right. But let's face it, Like there's going to be augmented reality versions of this that are going to have AI elements to them that are going to be like really bizarre. And I would love to play in those experiences. We'll have those in 20 years. In 50 years, we'll all be little brains in jars, right? Like the singularity will have happened. They'll be using us as batteries, like in the Matrix, And so, when we're all in the Matrix, I'm sure we'll have some amazing RPG experiences.
Amazing.
I'll see you then. I'll see you in the Matrix.
Can't wait. I can't
John,
wait.
thank you so much for coming on and putting up with our stuff.
And John,
novices,
honestly, we came into this going, I don't know what this is. You've actually made it sound like if nothing else, a ton of fun. And I can see why people would get into this. It sounds like a really fun way to do what I get to do for a living sometimes, which is go, oh yeah, well, what if I was this, or what if these were my circumstances?
Also to create friendships with people in a way that's not linear, where you're going drinking at a bar and just hanging out.
Yeah.
It's actually you're participating and you're improving, and it's communal. So that's healthy, especially in a world where we're isolated during COVID. And people are back again. It's a nice thing that people get out and play together. So thank you. We'll get the book anyway, even though he doesn't share in the revenue big time. It's a labor of love, obviously, for somebody.
Yeah, it's for a nonprofit academic press.
Which is really cool. No, it's cool that you do it.
Yep.
To do a 600-page book is a major accomplishment, especially in a world where I'm sure when you're on these shows, everyone I've seen you on knows all of the stuff. So they would call you on things if you got it wrong. So congratulations on not getting it so wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently the grease spell thing is one that I'll take as a ding for this episode. But really, thanks so much for having me.
No,
It was a pleasure.
Thanks,
Such
man.
a pleasure.
Thank you. So, David, did that warm the cockles of your heart? Was that like a major thing? Listen, that must make a gift to you. This is in lieu of a Christmas present, right?
It is. Here's
Wait, there's another belt coming your way, Dave.
I'd like a dragon on it, maybe some flames.
You betcha.
One of the things that you hear most often if you're into the game is you run into people who don't understand the game, who like there's no winning, you don't understand it, there's role playing, that's sort of weird. What's a dungeon master? That sounds somewhat sinister and sexual in some sort of way. So I do like to evangelize, to allow people to know that there is this game that is really more of a framework for people to come together, to have fun, and to interact in ways that you normally couldn't. And I think that it leads to really great friendships. And I think it's a great way for me on Fridays, to decompress through all the ups and downs of the week, to just put that all aside and just have fun and play a game with other people that you're not trying to beat anybody. In fact, your wizard and your barbarian and your druid all have different things that they're good at, and their different abilities. And so you're working in tandem. It's like that Marvel shot, where they're all coming in and, hitting the bad guy with their different powers and doing the different things that they do to win the day. And then while there isn't per se winning, there is feelings of accomplishment when you've taken down a dragon, and maybe you did the last shot, and then you get to come up with something that's like really crazy as your final killing blow. So
wait a minute, you eat pizza? I know it's Friday night. You're driving home at 11:30. Do you get a couple miles worth of? God, I killed the dragon. It was a good night. It feels real, right?
It does feel good because you have some really sort of cool moments. And here's the thing, and Jason, this is sort of harkens back to, I think, what you were originally saying. And this is actually how I got into it. I was doing something with my son would do some stretches late at night. And while he's in his bed and I was doing these stretches on him, and his sister was across the way, they would play this little game, much like you were saying.
Yeah.
Right? Just, I do cast ice on you and I froze you, and then I'm doing. And my son basically always figured out a way to win, and she would end up crying. And I had never played D&D. This is how I actually got into it. And I'm like, so D&D is a way to introduce a rule set, right? So to allow my kids to say, okay, I'm going to work under a rule set of my spell can do this. There's turns, things of that nature. There's success and there's failure. while also maintaining the creativity. If you think of something more creative than the other guy, you might not need a spell, or you might not need a big sword or something like
Right.
that. So it's dealing with creativity and a rule set, fairness, and fun.
Right,
So there you
right.
go.
Well, and the last comment on Dungeons & Dragons, which I found interesting, and I forgot to ask John. When you're creating your character, it's much more interesting if you have flaws. I can't be a guy who does everything well. You have to pick your flaws, right? Is that a rule? How many flaws you have to have, or
No. It's again, roll the dice. You roll a certain amount of die, a certain amount of time. So I think you have 6 stats, and you've rolled 6 numbers. And so some of those numbers are going to be good rolls, and so you'll have high numbers, and some of those rolls will be low because you had a bad roll. So where you allot your high numbers will be the things that you're skillful in. Like if you're a wizard, right? If you're going to cast a spell successfully, you have to have high intelligence. So you're going to put your highest roll into intelligence. But as a wizard, you're not going to be hitting anybody with your fists. So strength, you really don't need strength. So when you rolled that 8, you put the 8 over there. And so, but you never know what happens when you're actually playing. And sometimes you get, your weaknesses do end up.
Bite you in the butt.
There you
all
go.
right? I got to know one thing, producer Laurie. Now that you've seen this and you've heard about it, Jason, what do you guess on a scale of 1 to 10 how apt producer Laurie is to now get involved in a Dungeons and Dragons game? 0 to 10. What do you think?
Are there negative numbers?
I was just going to say, I was going to trick you with the -7. Laurie, are we correct on a scale of -5 to 10? How apt are you now after you've heard of the origins, how wonderful it is, the group commitment, how you can grow, how you can be an orc or a thing? What is your sense of the number in your head as far as that you'll ever play
And
this
you're
in the next
invited
year?
tonight to an introductory game.
I was going to say something really negative, but after hearing David talk about his children and how sweet it was, I have to say I will never play it. But
She's still at a -20, but it's got a
Minus
sweetness to
20.
it.
But she has a positive 2 respect for it now.
I'm just looking at, because I know Laurie. I love Laurie, but I'm thinking she's going, this is fascinating. I would never get near one of these games in my entire life. I drive around the street and avoid the people playing it, right? My goal is I like it, but you lose points with me as soon as you wear a cloak or a cape to have to play.
You
Like if I had to
don't.
wear a
You
hat with
don't.
Monopoly, okay, all right. I'm just saying.
That's the thing. That's the thing, Peter. You play the game how you want to play it. You might be playing with somebody who has a hat and a funny voice and an accent.
Oh, no, I won't. Oh, no, I won't be. Trust me.
we
But
won't.
none of that is required. None of
All
that
right,
is
calm down, Dave. Don't get
rules.
defensive. Don't get defensive.
And in Peter's game, none of it is allowed.
By the way, honey, where are you going? I'm going cloak shopping Friday night.
Now, I would put a spin on this game, and all of a sudden you'd have something for society. So instead of making it Dungeons and Dragons, you make it Bridges and Machines. And instead of saying, okay, you've entered a tavern, there's a mysterious stranger with a map and gold coins, I go, okay, you come to a ravine. On the other side of the ravine, there is a glowing emerald city. There is no bridge. You are a mathematician, you are a craftsman, you are a dreamer. What do you do?
I just nodded off. I didn't hear what you said. By the way, I got a game. It's called Volunteer in Your Community. Take 3 hours where you would be spinning dice and go and clean up a park with other people.
I go to college.
and
I
if
become
you-
an engineer.
And by the way, if you want to do that, pretend you're an elf. Clean up the park. Hey, elf, here's a broom. Clean up the broken glass.
That's like my favorite story in the world. Joe Mantello, what a great, just a brilliant actor and director in New York, and we were working together. He told a story. This has nothing to do with nothing, but you reminded me of it, and I love it. We were talking about, how did you become an actor? And he said, well, apparently I had a problem when I was a kid. He said he had one of those living rooms growing up where there's a velvet rope. You don't go in the living room. The plastic is covered, and the furniture's in plastic. And he said for some reason when he was 8 or 9 years old, he had seen The Exorcist. And he was pretty sure he was possessed. And one of the surefire signs that he was possessed is he went into the living room. And he's sitting on the couch as his mother is vacuuming. And he says, she's vacuuming right near the couch, and I feel a good possession coming on. And he says he's 9 years old, sitting on the couch going, a tongue out, right? And his mother, with the vacuum, goes, yeah, lift your feet, Satan.
I love when we do stories apropos to nothing we're talking about.
Right, but I just thought that would be me in the game.
Stories.
Oh, I'm a demon. And the Dragon Master goes, yeah.
Well, you know what? Everybody who plays the game, please thank you for putting up with us.
Happy 50th anniversary.
Happy 50th.
Dragons and dungeons and masters and players and giants and dwarves and elves and
whatever.
battlements and God bless you.
Go for it.
Enjoy. And let's, you and I will continue to not own a home nearly as nice as the guy who will not tell us
what
how
he does.
He makes a living.
We don't know what he's doing.
Something
going on there. He's no elf in real life, I'll tell you that.